Krispy Kreme says, I have an Undertale hot take. Kara is the only one that actually knows that the player exists.
Sans definitely doesn't. Sans only knows about resets. If you don't think that Flowey knows about the player, then Flowey thinks he's talking to Kara. I don't think so. Because how the fuck would he be talking to Kara? Again, sticking with Kara, I don't think that's the true name, but whatever. How would he be talking to Kara? Kara is long dead. Let Frisk be happy. Watch the cutscene if you don't believe me. No, I believe you. I remember that cutscene. And I don't think that I don't believe he thinks he's talking to the first fallen human. He's talking to the player. Now, I like that it's left ambiguous like that, because the cutscene, yes, it's literally Flowey talking to the player. Exactly. It's left technically ambiguous, and I think that's a good move, but I also don't think they say, see you, and why does he call the... Because in a game like this, you are expected to use your own name in that slot. My name right now in this game is Pitch. That is my player name. That is what I named the fallen human. He does not call you Hera. He calls you the name that you chose, assuming that it would be either your character's name or the file name. Because if you've played an RPG, then you expect that to just be either your character's name or the file name. Think like Legend of Zelda. You always name the protagonist after yourself. The reason he says that is because he is being meta and talking to the player using the name that they chose, assuming it would be their own, under the assumption that the player would choose their own name as the file name. That is why Flowey says, see you later, player name. Yeah, I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree with you on this. I think that Flowey was being meta. Okay. But can we at least agree that in the opening of Deltarune, the being talking to us in the vessel creation sequence is definitely talking directly to the player? Can we agree on that? Yes, it's Gaster 100% and he was... Yes, thank you, okay. I am willing to respectfully disagree with people about Flowey talking and about Kara at the end of the Jenna route, because it is meta, but, like, it's not, because it almost never, aside from Kara at the end of No Mercy, and arguably Flowey at the end of Neutral and True Pacifist, especially True Pacifist, the game's not that directly meta. But, yeah, Deltarune is super meta. I'm willing to respectfully disagree with people about Undertale. I think that Flowey and Kara are both speaking directly to the player, but I can understand why you might disagree in regards to Flowey. Because Undertale is very meta, but it's not so directly meta. It's not like DDLC levels or Deltarune levels. But Deltarune, and Deltarune, I'm willing to respectfully disagree with people about Gaster, how much stuff is specifically Gaster. I think it's obvious that Gaster is the voice on the phone, is the voice that spoke to you at the beginning, is the voice that was speaking on Twitter, is probably even the man behind the tree. I think that Gaster is very involved in Deltarune. You know what? Screw it. We're going to just chatting for a second. But I'm sorry, Jaru, I love you, but the player is the one I have my game disconnected from Steam because of speedrunning. Oof. But, so, the player is directly involved in... the player is directly involved in Deltarune. The player is directly controlling Kris. The player is the one who Gaster was directly speaking to on Twitter. Gaster is the one who was directly speaking to us in the Goner Maker sequence. Gaster is very much the one involved in my opinion, and I'm sorry, Jaru, I love so many of your theories. Ralsei is Asriel's dust, but I'm sorry. The reason that Gaster, man, I really need Gaster lore drops in Chapter 4. Bro, same. Seriously, like, Jaru, I love you, man. I love so many of your theories, but every time you start talking about meta shit, just shut up. Sorry, I use Jaru as my punching bag because I love most of his theories, except when he talks about the player's involvement. Because I disagree with him very strongly about... I disagree with him very strongly about that. But I love... I disagree with him about a lot. His theories are very far-fetched. But I find most of them very enjoyable. It's just when he says that the player can't be directly part of the narrative that he loses me, because I just don't think that's true. I think that it just makes so much more narrative sense to have the player be directly part of the narrative rather than having the player be like an indirect part of the narrative who is just hinted at meta-wise, and there's thematic stuff going on with it, but the player's not actually involved, and instead we are playing as insert other character here who is the one actually controlling Kris. It's just too confusing. The player has to be part of Deltarune's narrative. The player doesn't have to be, like, super directly involved. I frankly think it's better if the player's not super directly involved. But the player has to be part of the story. Because if the player isn't directly involved, then it just requires so many extra steps. Yeah, I'm glad Deltarune makes more sense than Undertale for the meta plot. Yeah, definitely. Because what Deltarune is doing is basically what Deltarune is doing with the meta-narrative is Undertale's meta-narrative on steroids. Undertale had a really fun regular narrative and a compelling meta-narrative, but it was weird. Like, this is the one time you will ever hear me talk bad about Undertale, because I love Undertale. But it is weird how it only directly acknowledges the player's existence 1.5 times. Okay, it's hard to tell who Flowey talks to, since he thinks Kara/Frisk/player are the same or different people depending on the route. Yeah, that's, again, the direct interpretation of the direct moments of meta-narrative in Undertale are, in my opinion, its weakest element. Because of how rare they are. Deltarune has been unpacking the player-protagonist dynamic and has been making it clear that we are not our protagonist since the opening of the game. Deltarune has been doing that. Undertale did not do that. Undertale only barely acknowledged that we are separate from Frisk. Yeah, Deltarune's naming sequence makes it very clear that we are different, and then the ending of Chapter 1 does that even more so. And then all of Chapter 2 does that even more so. And it would just be confusing to, again, using Jaru as my punching bag here, say that Asriel is possessing Kris, and that we're directly playing as Asriel, who is possessing Kris. Yeah, that's what's weird. That is really weird, and I don't love, again, Guru, exactly. I'm guessing you're not familiar with Jaru's theories, so let me just break it down for you, and I am gonna walk you through this insanity. So, keep in mind, I do genuinely have a lot of respect for Jaru. I think his theories I find his videos very entertaining, and when he's talking within the confines of the standard narrative, I genuinely find a lot of his theories pretty solid. That guy. That username is who we're talking about. And we're going full Pepe Sylvia on this. Jaru has two main theories that people talk about. Ralsei is Asriel's dust. Yeah. So, Jaru has two theories that he talks about a lot. Ralsei is Asriel's dust, and Oberon's smog. No, screw it. In order for Oberon's smog to make sense, this is my biggest issue with Jaru. A lot of his theories are built on the backs of other theories. So, the Ralsei is Asriel's dust theory posits 3 things. First of all, Asriel died and Kris is somehow at fault. Now, this does a lot of stuff with, like, jello knives and stuff that aren't actually an important part of the theory, but what it simply posits is that somehow Asriel died and Kris is at fault. I think that is a decent theory. It's kinda weird, but I think it's pretty solid. Number 2, Asriel's dust was scattered on the pink headband, and somehow that made Ralsei. And what this also explains is that Ralsei is then a, quote, dustner. And is that Ralsei is a dustner who is made from Asriel's dust, and that makes the object special, and that's why it appears, and that is why Ralsei has more powerful than other Darkners. That's part 2.5, is that, and also probably the most important part of the theory. Yeah, no, genuinely, Krispy Kreme, that is my favorite thing about this theory. I love the idea of dustners. They have 0 evidence whatsoever, but I think they're so cool. So, part 1 of the theory is kind of weird, but you just have to go with it, and I think it's fine. Part 2, specifically part 2.5, I think is so cool because the idea of dustners is fascinating, and that is what I love so much about that theory. Then, you get to part 3. And part 3 is where he loses me, and where he loses a lot of other people. Because it posits that Asriel is the one possessing Kris. Asriel's ghost is the one who is possessing Kris. Asriel's ghost is the one who we play as in the vessel creation sequence. Probably, he also has conflicting theories about that, but Asriel's ghost is possessing Kris. Asriel's ghost is the one who controls Kris's soul. Asriel's ghost is the one who... Asriel's ghost is the one who Kris is trying to get rid of. And that is where he loses me, because I don't think that's necessary. Player is not part of Deltarune's narrative. And with that line, what Jaru is positing is that he doesn't think that it makes any sense he doesn't think that it makes narrative sense for the player to be directly involved in the narrative, because he thinks that if the player is involved in the narrative, then that would flatten the stakes into the floor, because it would make us lose investment with everything else. So he thinks that there's a meta-narrative component, but that the player is not directly part of the story. And that is what I really don't like. Undertale makes more sense if it's not directly meta. Deltarune makes more sense if it is directly meta. Yeah, so before I go back to the game, here's the fundamental thing, in my opinion. Undertale makes more sense if it's not directly meta. I don't actually think it's not directly meta. I think I think that the demon at the end of No Mercy is directly talking to the player, and because that's confirmed to be the case, I think so is Flowey. I also think the game would make more sense if neither of those things were true. But Deltarune makes so much more sense if it is directly meta, because if it's not, then you have to do so much heavy lifting to justify stuff like Gaster on Twitter, and the Gaster newsletter, and the Gaster Valentine's Day card, and all that stuff. Yes, Deltarune has to be clean-cut meta, and if you try to say that it's not, Jaru, if you try to say that it's not, you have to jump through so many damn hoops. It's infuriating. And that is why I don't like any theory that posits that Deltarune isn't directly meta. Now that I have gotten extremely out of breath, losing my goddamn mind talking about Jaru, who again, I genuinely really like his theories. Oberon Smog is so cool. I just hate his opinion on the meta-narrative.